The moment my son slammed his fist on my kitchen table and said, "Sign the papers, Dad, or I'll make sure you spend your last years completely alone," I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and thought, when did this happen? When did this happen? When did my boy become this? Let me back up. My name is Eugene. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years teaching high school history in Dayton, Ohio, and when I retired, I had two things I was genuinely proud of: a paid-off house on Elmwood Drive that my late wife Carolyn and I had filled with 34 years of living, and a son named Wade who I truly believed, was a decent man. Carolyn passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of thing that doesn't give you time to prepare, doesn't give you time to say half the things you meant to say. Half the things you meant to say. She was 63. She had plans. We had plans. A trip to Portugal she'd been cutting magazine pictures out for since 2015, a vegetable garden she was going to expand, grandchildren she was going to spoil. Rotten. Instead, I got a folded flag from the funeral home and a casserole dish from the neighbors that I still haven't returned. Wade is our only child. He's 42 now. For the first year after his mother died, he was wonderful. He called every Sunday. He drove up from Cincinnati on holidays. He sat with me at the kitchen table and we talked about her, really talked. The kind of conversation where you laugh and cry in the same breath. I thought we were going to be okay. I thought grief had cracked us both open in a way that made us closer. I don't know exactly when things shifted. Somewhere around the 18-month mark, the Sunday calls started coming less often. When they did come, they were shorter, more distracted. I could hear his wife, Pamela, in the background sometimes. Not what she was saying, just the tone of it. Clipped, impatient. Pamela. I want to be fair about Pamela. She's not a villain in a movie. She's a woman who wanted a certain kind of life and had decided somewhere along the way that I was an obstacle to it. What kind of life? The kind where Wade's inheritance wasn't tied up in an old house in Dayton that needs so much work and isn't worth what you think it is, Eugene. She called me Eugene, not Dad, not even Gene. Eugene, like she was addressing a subordinate. The requests started small. Could I look into a reverse mortgage? Had I thought about downsizing? There was a lovely independent living community in Centerville. Very nice, Eugene. Really, you'd have people your own age around. I was 66 at the time. I just finished a 5K for the local food bank. I did not feel like I needed to be warehoused. I said no. Politely at first, then more firmly. Then Wade started coming alone. Without Pamela. Which sounds better but wasn't. Because when he came alone, he came with printed spreadsheets, property value estimates, cost projections for home maintenance over the next decade. He'd sit across from me at the same kitchen table where he'd done his homework as a teenager, where his mother had helped him study for his SATs, and he'd spread these papers out and look at me with this expression I can only describe as corporate, like I was a client he needed to manage. "Dad, you have to think about this practically," he said one evening in February. "We were supposed to be watching the game. The chicken I'd made was getting cold. This house is your biggest asset. You're sitting on close to $400,000 in equity, and you're spending it on property taxes and repairs. That money could be working for you." "It is working for me," I said. "I live here." He smiled. The kind of smile that means the other person thinks you're being childish. You know what I mean. I did know what he meant. He meant that money could be working for us. I didn't say that out loud. I wish I had. What I said was that I wasn't ready to make any decisions, that this was my home, that his mother and I had built something here that I wasn't prepared to just liquidate for the sake of a spreadsheet. He left early that night, didn't finish the chicken. Didn't say goodbye the way he used to. No hug, just a hand on my shoulder, brief and businesslike. The calls stopped entirely after that. Not just the Sunday ones. All of them. 3 months of silence. 90-some-odd days where my son did not call his father. I told myself he was busy. I told myself Pamela had probably gotten in his ear. I told myself a lot of things to keep from admitting what I already knew, which was that my child, the boy I'd coached Little League with and driven to every single one of his college visits and sat with in a hospital waiting room when his appendix burst at 19, had decided I was worth more to him as a transaction than as a father. I'm not someone who falls apart. Carolyn used to say, I process things the way a geological formation does, slowly, quietly, with enormous pressure, and then one day the landscape just looks different. She wasn't wrong. I kept going to my Monday night history book club. I kept walking the neighborhood in the mornings. I kept tending Carolyn's garden badly but with effort. And somewhere in those 3 months, I made a phone call. My friend Alton has been my attorney since 1998. We met on a city recreational soccer league. We were both terrible, genuinely embarrassing to watch, and we bonded over it. He does estate planning, mostly some family law. We talked about my situation in passing after Carolyn died, but I'd put off the formal stuff, updating the will, the trust, all of it. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon in May, and I said, Alton, I think I need to finally get my affairs in order, and I think I need to do it before my son decides to involve himself. Alton didn't ask a lot of questions. He understood what I was telling him. We met twice over the next 3 weeks, and by the end of it, my estate plan was airtight, updated, and entirely restructured. The house would go into a revocable living trust with me as the trustee for as long as I lived. After my death, it would be sold, and the proceeds divided between 3 organizations. The Dayton Literacy Coalition, where Carolyn had volunteered for 15 years, St. Sertle. Vincent de Paul, which had helped my own family when I was a child, and my father had been out of work, and a scholarship fund at the high school where I'd spent my career, designated for first-generation college students. Wade was not in it, not entirely. I left him $10,000, enough to signal that the omission was intentional. Alton's suggestion, and a good one. I didn't tell anyone. I went home, I put the documents in the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, and I went back to my life. 6 weeks later, Wade came back. He didn't call first. That alone should have told me the visit wasn't about reconciliation. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning in late June. I was in the backyard trying to figure out why Carolyn's tomato plants kept dying, and when I came around the side of the house and saw him standing on the porch, my first stupid instinct was relief. He came back. He's my son, and he came back. He had a folder under his arm. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't want coffee. He pulled papers out of the folder, a purchase agreement, something from a real estate firm, a document I didn't immediately recognize, and he spread them out in front of me the way you'd lay out evidence. Pamela and I found a buyer, he said. For the house. It's a good offer, Dad. Really good. Above asking. I looked at the papers, then I looked at him. I haven't listed the house, Wade. I know, but we reached out to a few agents just to get a sense of the market, and one of them had a client who was very interested in. You reached out to real estate agents about my house. He shifted in his chair. We were just exploring options. I want to tell you, I was calm. I was mostly on the outside. Inside, I was something else. Inside, I was standing in every room of this house at once, the room where Wade was born almost, because the hospital was 20 minutes away, and Carolyn nearly didn't make it. The kitchen where we'd had Christmas every year. The hallway where I'd measured his height in pencil marks on the door frame that were still there, under the paint. Inside, I was furious and devastated and exhausted in a way I don't have words for. I'm not selling the house, Wade. His jaw tightened. Dad, I am not selling this house. And that's when it happened. He stood up. He wasn't yelling, not yet, but his voice had an edge I hadn't heard from him before, something hard underneath it. You're being irrational. You're 68 years old. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and you are sitting on an asset that could set our whole family up. Yours, mine, eventually your grandkids, if we ever. I don't have grandchildren, Wade. He stopped. Something flickered across his face, guilt maybe, or something close to it. Then he said it. The thing that I've turned over in my mind 100 times since. Sign the papers, Dad, or I'll make sure you spend your last years completely alone. The room went very quiet. I remember noticing, absurdly, that the refrigerator was humming. I remember the way the morning light came through the window above the sink. The window that Carolyn always said faced the wrong direction, but grew to love because of what it did to the light in the late afternoon. I remember thinking, she would have known what to say right now. She always knew what to say. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen counter, where I'd set my coffee mug that morning next to the small wooden bowl Carolyn brought back from a trip to New Mexico in 2009. I picked up the mug, I took a sip, and then I turned around. "I'd like you to leave now," I said. "Dad, I'd like you to leave my house, Wade. Please take your papers." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he scooped up the folder, shoved it under his arm, and walked out the front door. He didn't slam it, which almost made it worse. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that. I don't know exactly how long. Then I went and sat in Carolyn's chair, the one by the window in the living room where she used to read, and I let myself feel all of it. The whole terrible weight of it. My son, my boy, what had happened to us, what had happened to him. I cried, if you're wondering. Yeah, I cried. But here's the thing about grief, about real grief, the kind that's been working on you for years. At some point, it stops feeling like drowning and starts feeling like weather. You know it's going to come. You know you're going to be wet and cold, and you know it's going to pass. I called Alton that afternoon just to make sure everything was in order. It was. Nothing Wade could do would change any of it. What I didn't expect was the phone call I got 10 days later from my neighbor, Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann is 71, sharp as a tack, and has lived across the street from me since 1997. She knows everything that happens on Elmwood Drive, not in a nosy way, but in the way of someone who genuinely pays attention to the world around her. She's one of those people who restores your faith in humanity just by existing. She called to tell me that a woman had come to her door that morning, youngish, professional looking, with a clipboard. She said she was doing a wellness check on behalf of my family, who were concerned about my ability to live independently. She asked Ruth Ann questions. Was I often confused? Had she noticed any deterioration? Did I have frequent visitors? Ruth Ann, bless her, told the woman she had the wrong house, that I was fine, and that she should move along. Then she called me. I sat with that for a long time. I wasn't surprised exactly, but having it confirmed that my son and daughter-in-law had apparently decided to build a case for some kind of competency challenge that landed differently than I expected. That wasn't just greed anymore, that was something uglier. Something that required planning. I called Alton again. He wasn't surprised either. He told me to document everything, to write down dates and what had happened with the woman and what Wade had said in my kitchen. I did. That same night, I sat down at the desk in my study, the desk that used to belong to Carolyn's father, and I wrote it all out in longhand, 4 pages. I dated and signed each one and mailed copies to Alton and to my brother Dale in Columbus. I also, on Alton's advice, had a formal cognitive evaluation done by my physician. Perfect score. My doctor seemed slightly amused that I'd requested it. I told her I had my reasons, and then I waited. I didn't reach out to Wade. I didn't send angry letters or threaten legal action or post anything on Facebook. I simply waited, and I tended my life. I went to book club. I took a weekend trip up to Lake Erie with Alton and his wife Barbara, and I ate good food and watched the water and remembered who I was outside of all of this. I also finally figured out the tomato plants. Drainage issue. Carolyn would have diagnosed it immediately. August came. A letter arrived from a law firm in Cincinnati. Not a formal legal filing, but a letter. Careful, lawyerly language about concerns regarding asset management and family interest in ensuring appropriate care. It was, essentially, a warning shot, a suggestion that if I didn't cooperate voluntarily, there were legal avenues they were prepared to explore. I brought it to Alton. He read it, set it down on his desk, and said, "Eugene, this is the legal equivalent of a temper tantrum. There is nothing here that can touch you. Your cognitive evaluation is documented, your estate plan is airtight, and there is no legal mechanism in Ohio that allows an adult child to override a competent parent's decisions about their own property." He paused. "Would you like me to respond?" "Please," I said. His response, from what I understand, was also carefully worded. It laid out the existence of the trust, the dated documentation of my cognitive health, the record of Wade's statements in my kitchen, and the attempted wellness check visit to my neighbor. It noted that any further action in this direction might constitute harassment of an elderly person under Ohio law, which is a first-degree misdemeanor. I never saw the response directly, but Wade called me 2 days after it was sent. I almost didn't pick up. I did. He sounded different. Not broken exactly, but deflated. The corporate voice was gone. What was left was something younger, something that sounded more like the person I remembered. He said, "Dad, I think I need to apologize. I didn't make it easy for him. I didn't say it's okay or I understand or any of the softening things people say when they want conflict to just dissolve. I let the silence sit between us for a moment. Then I said, 'I think you do too.'" He apologized. It took a while, and it was halting, and I could tell he was reading from something he'd written down, which made me sad in a complicated way. He said he'd been under financial pressure, which turned out to be real. His construction business had hit serious problems that year, and he hadn't told me, and that he'd convinced himself the house was the solution, and that he'd let that convince him I was the obstacle. He said, "I think I stopped seeing you as my dad for a while. I'm sorry for that. I'm 68 years old, and I have not cried twice in the same phone call since Carolyn's diagnosis. That day I came close. We didn't fix everything on that call. You don't. 31 years of teaching history will tell you that whatever gets broken between people takes time to repair, and sometimes the repaired version looks different from the original, and you have to decide if the new shape is something you can love." I decided I was willing to find out. Pamela, to her credit, sent a handwritten card. Short, no excuses. Just an acknowledgement that she had pushed Wade in a direction that wasn't right and that she was sorry for the position it had put me in. It wasn't everything, but it was something real, and I appreciated it. That was 8 months ago. Wade and I talk every week now. Not just texts, actual calls, sometimes long ones. He told me more about the business troubles, and I listened, and I helped where I could. Not with money from the house, but with time and attention, which is what he'd actually needed all along, and neither of us had known how to say. His company is steadying. He's working with a financial advisor now. Things are, cautiously, better. I'm still in my house on Elmwood Drive. The tomatoes are doing beautifully. I expanded the garden this spring. Not as ambitiously as Carolyn would have, but enough. There's a pepper plant in the corner that she always wanted to try, and it's thriving in a way that feels, irrationally but genuinely, like good news. My estate plan hasn't changed. I thought about it, actually, whether to revise it now that Wade and I have found our way back to each other. I sat with the question for several weeks. In the end, I decided to leave it as it is, not as punishment, not as a message, but because I came to understand something during all of this that I think is true. The best gift I can give my son is not a house or an inheritance. It's the example of a man who knew what he valued and held on to it even when it was hard. The scholarship fund, the literacy coalition, the work Carolyn gave years of her life to, that's my legacy. That's what I want to have meant. Wade knows this now. I told him directly, which was a conversation I should have had years ago and didn't. He was quiet for a long time after I explained it. Then he said, "I think Mom would have done the same thing." He's right. She would have. I have a friend, a younger colleague from the school, Doug, who still teaches there, who asked me recently what I would tell other people in a situation like mine. Older parents who feel their children circling, who feel like the thing they built over a lifetime is being assessed for parts. I thought about it for a while. Here's what I'd say. Get your paperwork done. Not because your children are bad people. Most of them aren't. But because clarity is a kindness to them and to you. A will, a trust, a healthcare directive, an attorney you trust. These aren't admissions of weakness or mortality. They're the same thing a good teacher does before a lesson. You prepare so that when things get complicated, you already know what you're there to do. And don't let anyone convince you that living in your own home, in your own life, on your own terms, is something you have to earn the right to do at 68. I'm going out to check on the pepper plant now. Carolyn would want to know how it's doing. I keep coming back to the moment Wade spread those papers across my kitchen table, the same table where his mother used to help him with homework, where we'd eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners, and I think about what it takes for a person to arrive at that point. Not just greed, something slower than that. A long, quiet erosion of the thing that makes you treat another human being as a person rather than a problem to be solved. I don't say that to condemn him. I say it because I think it's true, and because understanding it was the only way I could find any peace with what happened. Here's what I've come to believe. The way things unfolded between Wade and me wasn't random. It followed a logic, the same logic that most broken things follow. When he stopped calling, I could have chased him. I didn't. When the letter from the law firm arrived, I could have panicked or retaliated in anger. I didn't do that either. I called Alton. I got the cognitive evaluation. I wrote everything down. Every steady, deliberate choice I made in those months was a direct response to a choice he had made, and the outcome reflected that. Not luck, not fate, just the accumulated weight of decisions, his and mine, pressing down until something gave. What gave, eventually, was his certainty that I was helpless. I think about what it would have looked like if I'd handled it differently, if I'd signed those papers out of fear of being alone, if I'd let the threat of his withdrawal convince me that my home, my life, everything Carolyn and I built together was less important than keeping the peace. I would have lost the house and my son would have learned nothing. He would have carried that lesson, that pressure works, that love can be weaponized into every relationship for the rest of his life. What I did instead, by holding firm without cruelty, by preparing quietly instead of reacting loudly, was the harder thing. But it was also the thing that left a door open between us when it was all over. That's not an accident either. Ruth Ann asked me once after everything settled how I stayed so calm through all of it. I told her I wasn't calm exactly. I was just clear. There's a difference. Calm suggests nothing is moving inside you. What I had was more like a compass that kept working even when the weather was bad. I knew what I valued, I knew what I was willing to lose and what I wasn't, and that knowledge was steadier than any emotion I was feeling at the time. I earned that clarity, though. It didn't arrive automatically at 68. It came from 31 years of teaching young people how to think, how to sit with a hard question instead of grabbing the first easy answer. It came from watching Carolyn face the end of her life with more grace than I thought any person was capable of. It came from deciding in the months after she died that I was going to tend my own life the way she tended that garden, with patience, with attention, and with the understanding that some things need time to root before they can grow. Wade is still figuring out his own version of that. He's getting there. I see it in the calls now. The way he asks questions instead of arriving with answers. The way he's learning to sit with difficulty instead of trying to bulldoze through it. That's not a small thing. That took courage to start, and it'll take more to continue. I think that's what I'd want anyone to take from all of this. Not a strategy, not a checklist, just the recognition that who you are in a hard moment, whether you act from your best self or your most frightened one, is something you build slowly, over years, long before the hard moment arrives. Eugene didn't stay steady in that kitchen because he was naturally unshakable. He stayed steady because he had spent a long time becoming someone who knew what he stood for. That's the only preparation that matters.